we should be talking about problems all the time.
Mm,
They're a natural part of the job.
yeah.
And for that to happen, we have to have a culture where leaders accept problems will be raised and they're there to support. Even the best companies in the world have business problems. One of the reasons they're the best companies in the world is because they recognize, every new frontier, everything new is a type of a business problem. So you need a way to frame a business problem, what the business problem is. And I would say, let's think through that together. The origin of the Toyota production system, Toyota didn't just come along one day and say, wow, we should have this Toyota house. We should build that. And it should look like, or should be just in time and Jidoka and like all the thoughts behind the Toyota production system. Not like a bunch of people got in a room just brainstorming that. I think leaders, top leaders, managers in organizations, for the most part, have good intentions, and but often they just don't have a methodology to support that or a management system, or it's not clearly defined.
Hi, Sandy. If you've ever tried to improve your team or organization or processes, you've probably run into a familiar wall. Despite your best intentions, your efforts to get better somehow turn into more noise or sometimes more metrics or more pressure. I found sometimes that, you try to clarify the strategy, but it gets stuck in a slide deck or more often like forms and templates. And then it doesn't go from there. You try to set goals, but they don't seem to translate into measurable outcomes. What if the problem isn't effort or intent, but how we think about maybe strategy itself? Today's guest is Mark Reich, who's a leader at Toyota for 23 years and is now Chief Engineer for Strategy at the Lean Enterprise Institute. Mark is the author of the new book, Managing on Purpose. If you've ever heard of the Toyota production system, you'll get to hear about another pillar that has led to success at Toyota, Hoshin Kanri, a lesser known but vital strategic learning process. Beyond that, I found that many of us have heard the term lean, but what does it really mean and what's behind the tools and techniques? In this episode, Mark will give you an introduction to lean and point you to some resources to help you learn more. This is a discussion I've been looking forward to sharing with you. Hey, quick note. If you or someone you know is thinking about getting PMP certified, we put together a super helpful guide called The 5 Best Resources to Help You Pass the PMP on Your First Try. We've helped thousands of people earn their certification. We'd love to help you too. It's totally free and it's a great way to get a head start. Just go to 5bestresources.peopleandprojectspodcast.com to grab your copy. Again, that's 5bestresources.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Let's make this the year you get your PMP. Let's jump into our discussion with Mark about lean and his book, Managing on Purpose. Hey, Mark, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, my guess is you didn't at age 8 say, someday I want to be an expert on lean. So what got you into this area of focus in your early experiences for work?
Thanks for asking that question. my I would say, is it circuitous? Is that the word?
Let's go with that. Yeah.
A little bit my route to get into this. Sometimes I think in life you make opportunities and you stumble upon them both ways. I think probably this was a combination of the two.
Yeah.
I actually graduated in the early 80s with a degree from college in English writing, actually. And the economy wasn't so great. I was trying to navigate a career, and the economy in Japan was doing like incredibly well back in the 80s. And so I went to Japan.
Yeah.
I entered a graduate program in Nagoya, at a university called Nanzan University. I studied through that program. At the end of the program, I wanted to join and work for a Japanese company. I kind of learned Japanese and wanted to see what it'd be like to work for one.
Yeah.
I asked my professor if there was companies that hired. He said, well, sometimes we get calls. We don't do any kind of formal recruiting.
Yeah.
But he called his secretary and he said that this morning I got a call from Toyota. So I kind of stumbled, in some sense, I made that opportunity, but I also stumbled upon it.
Yeah.
And after interviewing, I ended up getting hired and joined Toyota in Japan and worked there for 6 years. In Japan, and then I
Yeah.
spent 23 years total with Toyota. So, and we can talk more about the content of that experience and what went into kind of my book. But at the end of that, 40 years later, I decided after graduating with an English major and then working at Toyota where they turned me into an industrial engineer, I decided I might want to write a book about some of my experiences. So that was the reason I finally fulfilled like a wish, a
Right.
bucket list item from 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I got a chance to write a book.
Yeah. It's a great story of English major to industrial engineer to author eventually someday. Yeah, yeah, that
Well,
is
it shows you the power of Toyota to make me an industrial engineer.
well, yeah, that's pretty neat. And just curious because that was not your first language, right? But you became, my understanding is very fluent at it. Was most of your work done in Japanese or English?
Well, when I was hired in Japan and worked the first 6 years, it was completely in Japanese. I
Same.
was the only non-Japanese person in my division of 150 people, and the work that we did it was called the Overseas Planning Division.
Mm,
I was in product planning. Primarily, our role was to working with the chief engineers, define the specifications, specs, the pricing, and supply for all uh, cars, trucks that went overseas.
yeah,
And so you can imagine Toyota, is sells vehicles in hundreds of countries.
yeah,
So we had to kind of determine you can't sell hundreds of different vehicles to every country. So we had to determine what type of vehicles, what the content of those vehicles would be, and working with the chief engineers helped to kind of support development of those vehicles. So I had to learn a lot about cars too.
oh man, what a great learning opportunity, though. I mean, that's
It was.
oh, what a gift. That's so cool. Well, I personally find as I interact with a lot of project managers and frontline leaders that they've heard of the Toyota production system. So TPS comes up in conversations, it seems, at least occasionally, but the Hoshin Kanri, much less familiar. So just to set the stage, I'd be curious on how you introduce those two pillars and how do you explain how they work together?
Great question. I think I'll maybe just briefly mention TPS and Lean.
Yeah.
The Toyota production system, of course, was something developed by Toyota based on business challenges they faced in the 50s and 60s. So, and your audience might be somewhat familiar with that. I mean, it's become kind of pretty famous across the world.
Yeah.
In 1989, the founder of the organization I'm with now, the Lean Enterprise Institute, a gentleman by the name of Jim Womack, he wrote a book called "The Machine That Changed the World,"
Mm,
which was a pretty famous book, particularly in the automotive industry at that time, because Jim was really the first person to kind of delineate what was inside the Toyota production system, but also the Toyota product development system. And the world had not really known about that up
mm,
before then, believe it or not.
mm.
And Jim also helped coin the term lean. He and his team.
I didn't know that.
And since that time, he decided to set up our institute because he believed, and I believe too,
Yeah.
that system makes organizations and people better.
Mm,
Now that's kind of the context for TPS and Lean.
yeah.
Separate from that, Toyota had and a few other companies actually many other companies back in the 50s had the fortune to have a gentleman by the name of Edward Deming, who
Mm,
is quite well known in the management community. He was a lot of the management principles we talk about now. He was one of the key people that brought thinking to modern management.
mhm.
And he went to Japan and helped Japan get itself on its feet after World War II.
Yeah.
One of the things that came out of that Japan was actually struggling significantly with quality. Japan is well known for quality now. It wasn't back in the 50s and
It was
60s.
kind of a joke, right? Made in Japan was almost like a
Yeah,
joke.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but a few Japanese companies really focused strongly on quality, wanted to change that and focus strongly on quality. And out of that came the total quality TQM, the total quality management. Toyota was one of those companies. Bridgestone, the tire company, was another one. And they decided, a couple of those organizations Toyota decided that quality had to be reflective not merely of what that was made in the factory, but what was made across the whole organization, how management managed. And so they introduced this concept of Hoshin Kanri. It's sometimes translated in English as strategy deployment. I don't like that terminology so much, but it was basically a methodology to build up capability and quality of the management system within Toyota. And since that time, it's Toyota's continued to use it, and so have other organizations. It's been introduced to the U.S., and there's a fair number of organizations that actually, a surprising number that I encounter that are trying the methodology too.
Well, I think your book should
And
be helpful in that too, right? As a guide of almost like a workbook of how to do that.
yes, well, I don't know if I answered fully your question. You said, "What's the difference between
Oh yeah,
TPS
that's right. Thank you. Yeah.
and Hoshin Kanri?" So, the Toyota production system was really founded on providing the greatest customer value at the highest quality with the lowest cost,
Mhm.
focusing on the frontline work, the value creating work of manufacturing, or in healthcare it could be the serving the patient. In construction, it's building a building. So focusing on that frontline work and ensuring you meet the customer requirements of that work, and um, with the shortest lead time, lowest cost, best quality. Hoshi Kanri is kind of, I think, in some sense, addresses something that's not so directly spoken to in TPS, and that is, okay, what's the governing kind of management system
Mhm.
that's is should be designed to support that? So they're kind of symbiotic. They
Mhm.
work well together. The really, I found in my experience, because I was working at Toyota, I was introduced to TPS first,
Mhm.
but fairly soon I understood what Hoshin Kanri was, because it's part of the management culture. But I found that plus introducing it while I introduced it to other organizations, that it's an excellent way to sustain continuous improvement in the organization, because it's about really building what I said at the beginning, building and improving the quality of the management system.
Yeah, it's such a I kind of took this from the book. They're like, vision is where you want to go. Maybe Hoshin Kanri is how we're going to get there, and the management stuff, and then the TPS is more this the continuous improvement, the daily management. I don't think that it doesn't perfectly capture it, but that's kind of how I have in my mind. Is that
Close to it.
roughly close?
Yeah, that's kind of close. I think, I mean, I think there is some overlap between
Mm-hmm.
TPS and Hoshin Kanri for sure. Many of the concepts are similar,
Mm-hmm.
but that I think what you described is pretty good relationship,
Yeah.
pretty good
I,
pretty
I
good
I
description.
appreciate, I feel like a classic challenge for teams. I kind of alluded to it in the intro is we get pulled into the tactical firefighting and then we lose the sight of the long-term strategic clarity. So from your experience, what are some common mistakes that leaders can make when we're trying to improve the business, but we don't quite hit the mark?
Common mistakes that leaders make when they're trying to improve the business but don't hit the mark. That's your
Yeah, yeah.
question?
Like what, when we're trying to make things better, but it just um like for example, here's some I feel like I took from your book. Sometimes we don't even know what improve means. For
Hmm.
example.
Well, I would say, generally, I'm kind of I have a positive outlook on mankind. I think leaders, top leaders, managers in organizations, for the most part, have good intentions,
Hmm.
and so, but often they just don't have a methodology to support that, or a management system,
Hmm.
or it's not clearly defined. And so I think, what I common when I having learned what I learned in Toyota, and I came out and saw what organizations did.
Yeah,
What I commonly saw was organizations, to kind of speak to your question,
yeah,
leaders in organizations might have established a vision for the organization. Actually, I fairly commonly saw something like that.
yeah.
But it was often in a PowerPoint deck. Maybe it was shared with the team members through some town hall meeting or something, or maybe it was posted in a room where people could see it, but there was no concrete understanding of how the organization was going to go about achieving that. And so, what Hoshin Kanri is meant to kind of help organizations with is take that. Let's first of all define what that vision might be, because some organizations don't have that either. Let's get common understanding across the leadership and across the organization what that means, And then let's consider other inputs, like how do our customers feel about us? How do our team members feel about us? What about if you're a public company, you need to answer to shareholders or the board? What are their inputs? And how can you formulate then some key kind of, I call them Hoshin objectives that you can actually uh, execute on to achieve the vision you want to achieve. And that can, by pulling that kind of work together and aligning to it in the organization, horizontally and vertically. I talk about that in my book.
Mhm.
It builds capability of the organization and a mechanism, a management system, like I mentioned before, for the organization to execute and achieve that vision. And most organizations I've been to don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah, something that came to mind while reading your book is I feel like when I do hear about Hoshin Kanri, X Matrix or something like that comes in, and I got the impression from your book that you're not a major fan of this, if I understood you right, because it can become about the form and not about the dialogue and the discussions and everything around it. Would you elaborate on that?
Well, yes, and I say that from real experience. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been in organizations where and I've been asked that question, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, so you're going to teach us about the X matrix?"
Yeah.
Well, honestly, that I'm not nothing, and I talk about this in my book.
Mm,
I don't necessarily have any personal
right.
against that tool,
Yeah.
even though many organizations that I've encountered have found it a little bit cumbersome to use, to tell
Mhm,
you the truth,
mhm,
particularly for the purposes that I talk about in my book about like uh, cascading and breaking down initiatives in the organization. My point is like, don't focus on the tool.
all right.
And this is an issue actually it's an issue that's true of the Toyota production system or Lean as well. I mean, some organizations tend to focus on some of the tools that exist, and those tools are in place for a reason,
Yeah.
but the tools have to serve a purpose. And so if the tool effectively serves the purpose that you're trying to achieve through Hoshin Kanri, which means the things for example, we just talked about, establishing your vision, determining what are the key things you have to go after to kind of achieve that vision. Well, then tools can be helpful. And to be very honest, I mean, I wrote a workbook. So my book, Managing on Purpose, is a workbook. I include some templates, some forms that organizations can use for that purpose.
Yeah.
But each one of those, I try to be pretty thorough in explaining the purpose that
Mhm.
what they're used for.
Yeah.
So don't focus on the tool first.
Yeah, it's such an easy thing in the project management world as well. It's like
Hmm.
fill out the charter and make the auditors happy, and
Right.
but it's not about just making auditors happy. So it seems, if I understand you right, that if we want a place to start, if we don't have the vision, that's got to be a place where we start. So like if somebody was relatively new to this whole thing and they wanted to start to get more strategic alignment, I don't know what do you like to coach them to do just to start?
Well, it's interesting. You brought up the vision, and I
Yeah.
think that's something you could do.
Mhm.
But I think, the framework or the structure I just talked about,
Yeah.
which is like, what's your vision and how do you go about achieving? I think a lot of organizations, uh, let's just say, haven't tested their capabilities effectively enough. And and that's why I think a lot of times when I mentioned to you, I go in and I see organizations that have vision
Right.
and they don't have necessarily a way to go about achieving that. It's because I don't think they did the exercise, and in a way it's one of those tools. They created this tool, a vision, that they think would help clarify, like, for the organization, for the leadership team, maybe on what they should pursue, which and hope and perhaps it did,
Hmm.
but that's like only a small part of the equation. I mean, I would actually, my recommendation to organizations is you don't need to start there.
Mm.
Some people think, well, wow, well, wait a second, why wouldn't you start with a vision when you know we're going? Well, I think because what I propose in my book is that the way this works, and I've seen this because I've experienced it with multiple organizations,
Yeah.
the way this works most effectively
Yeah.
is if you get alignment among the leadership team on what you want to do, and based on like 3 to 5 objectives. I
Mm.
said too many organizations have 40 or 50. So focus on some critical things to accomplish, and then engage other levels of the organization on and break down those responsibilities to accomplish those things. You might establish something high level at the organization, but it's not gonna be accomplished unless you've engaged others in, because the problems that those objectives are meant to address are going to exist in the work in the organization.
Mm.
And so engaging people throughout the organization. So I would say learn those capabilities, because that's are often new things that companies have to learn. Don't worry about what's going to happen 5, 10 years from now. I mean, we want to worry about that
Right,
eventually,
but
of course.
yeah.
But I say exercise. It's kind of like saying one day, I think I'll just go out. I've never run before. Maybe I'll go out and run a marathon. I'm going to sign up for the Boston Marathon. How about you run a mile
Right.
and see if you can run a mile?
Yeah.
And I tell you the same thing. Like here, let's just see for a year, what are we going to plan to do this year? And
Yeah.
let's put in place some key things we agree to do, and then some plan to support achieving that, and then monitor how we're doing throughout the course of the year. We'll actually learn a lot about probably what we should be doing 3, 4, 5 years from now just by doing that exercise.
Mm. Right. I don't know if it's possible to give an example without giving out anything confidential. I don't know if there's a way to
Okay.
do it, but is there a way to kind of explain how a company what they decide to focus on by following that advice?
Yeah. Well, I can share with you the example that's a case study that's included in the book,
Sure.
and that's from a company called Turner Construction.
Mm.
Turner Construction is the largest construction company in the United States. I think they're like a $25 billion company, and we worked quite closely with their New York business unit, and which is one of their largest business units in the organization. Turner's pretty well known for building a lot of big buildings. They build like Yankee Stadium. They build the Buffalo Bills. They're in the process of rebuilding the Buffalo Bills Stadium. But they also build a lot of skyscrapers. If you go to Manhattan, you probably built half of the skyline there. And so we worked closely with our New York business unit. We started by doing problem solving with the top leaders in the organization. The top guy, who's the senior vice president of that business unit, and his staff, about 6 or 7 people, went through problem solving training. They learned how to solve problems in the organization, and then after they did that, they realized, they had a lot of problems. And they realized that maybe they should be focusing differently on how to solve those problems. So we introduced Hoshin Kanri to them, and it got them to focus on a few critical things that were really important for the New York business unit. And one of those things that's talked about a little bit in the book was safety. In the case study that's in the book, the New York business unit was, let's just say, the construction industry in general struggles with safety. I think there's a statistic like 32% of deaths in the workplace are in the construction industry
Yeah.
in the United States, that
Mm.
is. And and Turner is a better company, but they still struggled a lot. And New York business unit was one of the poorer performing units. So they made it a priority for a couple years that they were going to focus on what greatly improving what they call a recordable incident rate (RIR) in their on their job sites across New York. And that was a pretty challenging objective. But what they did is they first of all, they created they determined that would be their Hoshin. They got alignment across the leadership team for that. They cascaded the organization in terms of like how they would go about solving that problem. And the things I said about you got to put in place a plan to execute.
All right.
The way they approached it was they said, look, we're going to monitor anytime there is an incident, safety incident that occurs on a job site. Within 48 hours, it needs to be reported. In fact, it needs to be reported all the way up to the senior vice president. And you need to show like a root cause analysis and a countermeasure on how you're going to prevent that problem from occurring again. and that's going to be shared across the organization. So they created what they called these co-learning calls,
Hmm.
where that were set up whenever an incident occurred. They would discuss the incident and with a top leadership, and then leadership will go and see the job site where that occurred. And that routine drove a lot of like good problem solving organization to address specific issues. And their recordable rate in the course of like 3 to 4 years went from, I think it was around 7.0 down to less than one.
Wow.
And now they're the best, probably the best in the industry. They're definitely best in turn.
That's nice. Yeah. That's a great example. I feel like strategy, the good side of that is often it's about direction. So we can kind of see like what do we need to focus on. But I wonder, even an example like that, sometimes it feels like it's also a punitive thing. So like you didn't hit your safety targets. I wonder sometimes if some systems almost create a disincentive to report that there was a safety problem, you know? And so I'm interested in how these are not just planning systems, but also you mentioned, I feel like it's a big theme throughout the book. These are also approaches for developing people. It's not just a carrot or a stick. It's a system to develop people. And would you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I think there's two things you're talking about.
Yeah.
One is the culture.
Hmm.
Another is based, and within that culture, how do we develop capability of people?
Yeah.
The culture in Toyota was that problems are like, we should be talking about problems all the time.
Mm,
They're a natural part of the job.
yeah.
And for that to happen, we have to have a culture where leaders accept problems will be raised and they're there to support. I mean, a fundamental principle, a fundamental, like I would say, subsystem of the Toyota production system of Toyota was something called the andon, which is the cord on the assembly line. That when you're on the assembly line in Toyota, if you're a team member building cars, and you have a problem that's going to impact that quality or something happens while in your operation, you have a cord you can pull. That cord is meant for someone to come and help you. If you're not able to resolve that issue, the line will stop. So any team member in Toyota can stop the line. That's pretty amazing power.
Right.
But the beauty of the system is, one, there is someone available to always help you, and two, you when they come to help, they're there to help. They're not there to punish.
Hmm.
Like, why did you pull that damn cord?
Right.
So that let's just think of that conceptually. Same thing in the example we talked about
Yeah.
from Turner. Leaders have, when their issues occur, like the safety and incident occurs, those co-learning calls. Remember, they're called co-learning calls. They're
Mm.
not called like punishment calls.
Right.
I mean, they're opportunity for the leaders to learn about the problem and understand how could that possibly have happened? How could what can the organization learn from that? And how can I help you? That so there's so organizations have to um, build a culture like that for the organization to be, I think, for problem solving to effectively occur.
Yeah.
Now, you ask about the second part of that question was people development.
Hmm.
Uh, I shared with you the story of just now about Turner.
Yeah.
And a key part of that I mentioned, remember, was that the first thing Turner did was the top guy at Turner in the New York business unit and his staff, his like 5 or 6 general managers, they solved their own business problem. And I'm not talking about like a big high level problem in the organization. They went down to the front line, how ladders were, like, one issue was around how ladders were being used.
Mm.
Another issue was around how curtain wall was being installed, and they were having a lot of issues with one of their suppliers.
Mm.
So they looked at and solved that kind of problem. What that made them learn was like, what are some of the struggles that exist in the actual, like, putting together the building? They're not they're I think they were accustomed before that to being in like conference rooms. But once they went through that process, they realized that that's a methodology that you can use to solve business problems at all levels in the organization. And they were able to coach others to do that. But the leaders have to go through that kind of problem solving themselves. And so, to your point of development, I think a primary way that Hoshin Kanri in my book talks about the supporting of development is one primary way is leaders solve problems and and those problems kind of get broken down in the organization, and each person owns part of that and has their own problem to solve. So it's a both a top down and bottom up problem solving methodology.
Yeah. Yeah. And people get that idea as they read the book. I mentioned this before. Most of our listeners are project managers or frontline leaders, and some have been exposed to lean, but many haven't. So, in your experience, what are some of the biggest, I don't know if it'd be myths or just misunderstandings or misconceptions that people tend to have about lean? And how do you like to introduce it to people when they're kind of starting from scratch with the idea?
Well, I think, a typical misunderstanding often is something that we've talked about already in this discussion is they think about a tool.
Yeah.
And I've heard about like one common tool we use is a value stream map to like map out what a process looks like. I've heard about that. I used that once. It didn't seem like it worked so well for me. But as opposed to, if you go back to the story, it's kind of like you go back to the story of the origin of what was the origin of the Toyota production system.
Mm.
The origin of the Toyota production system, Toyota didn't just come along one day and say, wow, we should have this Toyota house. We should build that. And it should look like, or should be just in time and Jidoka and like all like the thoughts behind the Toyota production system. Not like a bunch of people got in a room and just brainstormed that. What happened was in the 1950s, I mean, Toyota was coming out of World War II, or Japan was coming out of World War II. A lot of industries were struggling, particularly the automotive industry. And Toyota was one of them. And Toyota nearly went bankrupt and they had no money and the banks wouldn't lend them money. So they had to survive. They had to think about how to, and this is the kind of one of the key parts of what I would say generated the Toyota production system is, and it's introduced by in the person who was really seminal and important in introducing it to Toyota was a gentleman by the name of Taiichi Ono. And he said we need to do everything we can to reduce the lead time from order to cash. And the reason for that was they didn't have any money. So it came out of business necessity.
It's interesting.
And that meant like we can't easily invest in new equipment. We can't just buy land. In Japan, actually, land is pretty expensive. And we want to we couldn't hold it, can't hold inventory because that's like cash for us, right? Or any company. So it was born of necessity. And so when people talk to me about lean and I talk to them and I first introduce it or talk to them, I ask them, and sometimes they don't know. I ask them, what's the business problem you're trying to solve?
Mm.
And how do you think lean will help you?
Yeah.
We need to clarify and every organization must have a business problem. I mean, even the best companies in the world have business problems. One of the reasons they're the best companies in the world is because they recognize, every new frontier, everything new is a type of a business problem. So you need a way to frame a business problem, what the business problem is. And I would say, let's think through that together. And I was just on a call with I can't say the name,
Yeah.
with a company
Mhm.
late last week, where they were struggling with, what was their business problem. And it turns out like just in a half hour phone call, it became clear. Like they have a fairly effective production process, but they're getting a lot of downtime and they're growing.
Mm.
Their business is growing and it's growing pretty fast. So pretty soon they're going to need to do one of two things: either make their equipment run better
All right.
or invest a lot of money in new equipment.
Mhm.
So if you're the owner of that company, I think you'd probably start with seeing, can we get more out of what we have now? And that's their business problem to solve. That within that context, lean can be very effective in helping you take out waste in the process and look at seeing how you can build a better capability of your equipment.
I feel like when I ask people, in your experience, what is lean? Almost always what they'll say is it's reducing waste. Yeah. And that certainly is a big part of it. You even mentioned it there. But are there other I feel like learning is part of it, right? I mean, optimizing. There was one chart I saw, Mark, and it said defer decisions And that one so surprised me because you think of last thing we want to do is defer decisions, but it was taught to me as part of lean is making decisions at the last responsible moment as part of it. Does that sound familiar? Is that a part of lean that you've heard before?
Well, I guess you want to make decisions at the right time.
Yeah.
I don't know. Uh, I'm not sure. Making decisions at the last
Responsible
possible
moment was the
moment.
way I was taught. It's a lean principle because if you make the decision too early, we maybe are not experimenting enough to know we've got the real problem. But I don't know. I just think a lot of us have the opportunity to learn more about what is included in these concepts. In fact, if just based on the depth of your experience, if you had to pick one or two lean concepts or uh, the danger of tools, I suppose, but that project managers or frontline leaders would benefit from if we explored them more deeply, what comes to mind?
Well, in the data production system, there's four fundamental philosophies.
Yeah.
The first one is customer first,
Mm,
and that means that the customer to some extent is determined, or the market determines the price. And as our company, our responsibility is to reduce our cost to be able to meet that price, and not just to increase uh, the price where the market may bear it.
mm,
Secondly, related to customer first is we want to deliver 100% quality to the customer, and that means a customer can be the end user, but it could also be the next process in the company.
mm,
So that there's customer first. There's also a principle around what we call like it relates to people. People are the most important asset. So that means that people's capability is unlimited. We need mechanisms, systems to develop capability of those people. That has to be a constant focus.
mm.
And when I worked in Toyota, I mean, I actually, it was tough. It's a tough industry to work in,
Mm.
but I always felt that the people I worked for and worked with were like trying to develop my capability.
Yeah.
The third principle is Kaizen, or continuous improvement. That means that everybody's responsible every day to continually improve their job. That's not some special group's responsibility. It's the responsibility of everyone in the organization. And so I think like living up to that and building a culture that allows that improvement to occur. And then the last one, the fourth one, philosophy is something in Toyota we call Genshi Genbutsu, but it basically means shop floor first. It means the work, a little bit to your point earlier about value. The work that's most important for the organization is the work that creates value for the customer. And that means in a company, that's going to be the production and development and production of a car company, development and production of the car. I mean, that's what a customer's paying for.
Right.
They want
Right.
a good quality car that's been made well. And so it's the role of others in the organization. That doesn't mean other people's jobs aren't important,
Right.
but the conceptually, the role is to uh, your job is to kind of support that value creating work as best you can. So you asked me, those are four fundamental philosophies that
Yeah.
center around you can say they center around the customer, they center around the employee, they center around management too.
Yeah. That's good. Because we just have so much to learn. If someone listening to us wanted to start exploring this more, you work with for the Lean Enterprise Institute, lean.org. What are some examples of resources that are available on lean.org?
Well, we've been around since 1997.
Yeah.
Our founder, I mentioned to you, wrote a book, Machine Engineers of the World. He wrote another book in 1997 called Lean Thinking, and pretty well known book as well. And so he's a big believer that get the reason he set up our institute was to get know-how out into the community around this topic. And so if you go to lean.org and you're interested in this topic, you'll find case studies. The case study I just mentioned is also available on our website around the Turner Construction company. But I mean, there's we publish regular posts. We do our own podcasts. There's just a lot of good information on lean.org that you can get. Of course, there's availability. You can buy my book there. You can buy resources there too. Training we do. We're a 501(c) nonprofit, and so we're kind of a research and education institute. So we do offer educational resources. We also offer, as I said, books for sale, and there's a ton of free content for anything you might be interested. Just from the basics of what is Lean all about, like you asked me, to specific detailed instruction on, for example, how to write job instruction or how to do standardized work or those kind of components of lean thinking and practice.
Do I remember seeing also that there's coaching ability? So if an organization wanted someone to help guide them on in their journey?
Sure, we have coaching that supports the educational classes we teach. We also offer the example I gave you around Turner Construction was that was an engagement that LEI worked directly with Turner to coach their leadership and build their capabilities. So we offer that as an opportunity too.
Yeah, I want to make sure people knew about that. Yeah, just one last question I always like to ask near the end, because we just have so many parents that listen to the podcast. Have you found ways that lean thinking has helped you at home, and any ways you've tried to introduce those to the kids that you mentioned in the book?
Well, surprisingly, I have a really, I think, an organized family. I mean, they're pretty good at like keeping things together in the household. I haven't had to, in that respect.
Yeah.
But I've used those. I have found that a lot of the thinking and the principles, particularly around coaching and how you develop people, are applicable whether you're talking about your staff or some of that can cross over into your children. How do you develop capability of? I mean, I know personally, but also I know from my own kids that they've developed through experiences that they have. That they've kind of sometimes you worry a little bit, but they try on their own, and they're sometimes they're not super successful the first time around, but they learn from that. And I think that type of let's say experimentation and failure, and they don't get in trouble from as long as they're not hurting themselves.
Right.
They don't get in trouble from their parents. I think I try to encourage that in my with my kids, and also I have two daughters. They're all grown up now.
Yeah. Well, for those listening, if you want to learn more about Lean and Hoshin Kanri, I just recommend you get a copy of Mark's new book, Managing on Purpose. I put links to the book's website, and lean.org in the show notes for this cast. So, Mark, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you very much, Andy. It was great being here.
A special thanks to Mark for joining us here on episode 472 of the People and Projects podcast. I just got to tell you, the more I learn about Lean, the more I want to learn about Lean. And I think if you don't have much of a background on this, I think you should join me on this journey here. I think the more we learn about it, the more we can find ways to apply it to what we do, regardless of whether you're a project manager or have project in your title. We all have to find ways to kind of get stuff done. And the heritage of agile approaches in project management is from Lean. And so a lot of this idea of keeping the focus on value and reducing waste, that applies to just about any sort of role. I have to say, if you heard this idea of the Hoshin Kanri and you're like, I'd like to know more about this, I got to tell you, I think this is the perfect book. I mean, it's easy to read. It's super practical. I think you'll find it helpful in that regard. But if nothing else, make sure to check out lean.org to learn and take advantage of some of the free resources, as well as the paid resources there as well. If you pick up a copy of the book, or if you spend time on that website and you're like, hey, here's some interesting things, I'd love to hear what you take away from them. You can reach me at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. So whether it is from the book or today's discussion or what you see on lean.org or your personal experiences with Lean, I'd love to hear what resonated with you. We really haven't had many episodes on Lean specifically, but when it comes to strategy, we had episode 438 with Jeff Gotthelf. It's a book about OKRs, which OKRs are different from Hoshin Kanri, but I'm telling you, there's some interesting similarities, I think. And I think, if nothing else, the overall discussion with Jeff is worth checking out. Also, episode 387 with Atif Rafiq. It's a book about taking a strategic approach to dealing with uncertainty. I think that's something that a lot of us are focused on, and I think that could help. Also, episode 320 with Greg Githens. Now, this is less about, corporate or team or department strategy. And interestingly, it's more about how to think strategically. Something I took away from that discussion, even with Greg, was because I run into a lot of very nice project managers or nice leaders. And he's like, leadership is always a practice of kindness, but not always niceness. Right? That's something from the discussion. In our project management classes, we have a long discussion about that because you could say it's just semantics, but I think sometimes out of our niceness, we end up actually hurting our projects and not having the conversations that we need to have. So if that sounds interesting, check out episode 320. I recommend all those discussions. I think you'll take something away from them all. Hey, at the top of the show, I mentioned our 5 best resources to pass your PMP on the first try. If you know somebody, maybe it's you, but if you know somebody who's going for their PMP, you know what? Make sure to let them know about it. There's a link in the show notes. And, sometimes people listen to the podcast because, I've got my PMP. I'm just trying to rack up PDUs. So good for you. Hopefully, you get free PDUs, professional development units, just by listening to the podcast. So if you want to learn more about how to report those, go to peopleandprojectspodcast.com/free PDUs. And one last thing, can I ask you a favor? If you've not left a review on the People and Projects podcast, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or wherever you consume your podcast, it just makes such a difference. It only takes a couple of minutes. So if you do that, that'd be great. Let me just say on behalf of me and my team, thank you so much for listening to the People and Projects podcast.